Today is one of the most significant days impacting elections in North Carolina in years. The state Supreme Court issued 3 decisions today affecting voting rights ahead of the 2024 election.
The 3 decisions the state Supreme Court handed down Friday will help shape what happens in next year's elections.
This is absolutely a tremendously positively consequential day for North Carolina.
It's 3 strikes against democracy, in my opinion.
Republicans recently gained a majority on the court and reversed 2 decisions made last year when Democrats had the majority. The first one deals with partisan gerrymandering. The Republican justices now say the legislature will have broad authority to redraw districts for Congress and the General Assembly. It could help Republicans pick up seats in Congress and maintain their supermajority in the legislature. Republican House Speaker Tim Moore argues the court overreached last year when the Democratic majority struck down the electoral maps they drew.
The North Carolina General Assembly will follow the law. We will follow the Constitution.
Bob Phillips is with Common Cause North Carolina, which sued over this.
This does give them, I think, free rein to preordain the maps in ways that will lock them in for the remainder of the decade.
The Supreme Court also sided with Republicans on the state's voter ID law, which will require identification to vote. In the third case, they decided convicted felons who are out of prison but still serving probation or parole do not have the right to vote.
Happy Saturday and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, April 29th, 2023. I hope the weather's nice where you are. It seems to be nice here. I'm looking out this studio window. And so if you can get out and do something today, I hope you can. In the meantime, Cal Atkinson is here. Hey, Val.
Hello, Ed. How are you this morning?
Well, not too good, Val. You saw the opening of the show. We got a lot to talk about. And the last piece of the opening is the North Carolina Supreme Court. And we've been trying to talk about the Supreme Court since the elections in the midterm. And we were talking about how the Republicans made a lot of inroads in the state of North Carolina. Val, what's the outcome of these 3 decisions? 3 decisions all on one day and terrible decisions in my point of view. Where does that put us? Not just here in North Carolina, because I think if they see that they can get away with this in North Carolina, they're going to try it in other places.
Well, it puts us way back, Ed. I was just thinking and taking notes after reading that this morning. And the place I think it takes us is pre-24th Amendment. The 24th Amendment, of course, stopped the poll tax or any kind of tax you would associate with requiring people to pay money in order to vote. And that changed all of that. It was ratified in January of 64, of course, and then in 65, we had the Voting Rights Act. But before all of that happened, Ed, it was a situation where we had numbers of Black folks of voting age, a minuscule percentage of that actually were registered in any state. And then an even smaller fraction that actually went out to vote. So we knew it was something wrong and we did some changes. It appears that after what's happened in North Carolina in the Supreme Court, that we are going right back to that again, Ed. And I know we're going to get to it in some detail, but it affected gerrymandering. It took the collar and the leash off of the legislators, and they can do anything they want with that. It affected voter ID, and people who are primarily affected by voter ID are people of color, young folks, and people who are disabled and have other restrictive type measurements about their daily lives. And we're going to see a drop-off, I believe, is my prediction. We're going to see a drop-off of voter turnout in these groups that I just mentioned in the state of North Carolina. And that's the goal, the aim of the Republican Party. They can't out-message us, if there's such a word. They can't do that. They've given up on that. So they've decided to out-turnout us. They've decided to hold us down in terms of making sure we don't go to the polls in the proper number. And then those who do happen to go to the polls, we don't care how they vote, because once the districts are gerrymandered, we don't care who shows up to the polls. Once we have voter ID in place, we know certain people are not going to show up to the polls. And I think they came up with a number of 56,000 are directly affected by this felonious voting piece that they've done, which for people who don't understand is that the previous Supreme Court had ruled that if you finish serving your time, you should be able to have your voting rights restored. Now this Supreme Court is coming and saying, well, hold on a second. In addition to serving your time, we want you to have cleared up any probation status that you may have or parole status that you may have. And here's the killer, Ed, pay any related fines.
Yeah.
And somebody who's been in jail for years may not have any restitution fines money to pay in order to get that smear off of their record and have their voting rights restored. It's going to be really, really bad for Democrats and people of color in North Carolina moving forward as far as voting is concerned.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns, Val. Let's start with that felonious background thing first. I think we can deal with that the quickest, because you said there's 50-some thousand. I found that number too this morning. We're thinking a lot like this morning, because I was like, well, how many people could it be? And 56,000 is a significant number in North Carolina, because if you look at the recent elections, a lot of them have turned on anywhere from 50 to 100,000 in statewide races where that's made a difference, right? Or could make a difference. So I do have a concern there. I think what they're doing, Val, is taking a playbook out of Florida. I don't know if you remember during the elections, I think we even played some video where they started harassing people who had been restored to voting, but then when they went and registered, they maybe even voted through several cycles, then they started harassing those people in an attempt to scare people from going to the polls to vote. I mean, that's the whole thing here, is that they want to make sure that people don't vote. And even though 50,000 doesn't sound like a lot out of 7 million possible votes, it does in North Carolina. Because if you look at the numbers, we're purple. You know, like they like to say, elections can turn on very few votes. So I'm concerned there. Let's then go to the other one. I think it's the biggest thing. It's this gerrymandering thing. We talked a lot, in the lead up to the midterms about what our predictions were about how many seats the Democrats could win. And people like Wiley Nickel in North Carolina ended up winning a seat that we weren't sure about. And it came out 7-7, Val, which almost knocked me to the floor, because I had been worried with the other districts that are probably going to reappear that it was going to be 11-3. And that what they were essentially going to do is give the Democrats, just 3 and maybe 4. And 2 of those would be 2 Black folks serving, and then Raleigh and then Alma's district, wherever that happens to be, depending on how they draw it, right? So let's go back to that, Val, this gerrymandering piece of it. How fast can the Republicans redo this, and will this be a problem in 24, or do you think the Republicans like Phil Berger's, those people in North Carolina and more are going to wait until they hear from the federal Supreme Court?
No, they're going to put this on speed dial. This is going to happen right away. They will, because they have a veto-proof House, they have a veto-proof Senate, they have control of the Supreme Court. They run things in North Carolina, although they are nowhere near the majority. But they have all of the things in place, Ed, that they are going to redraw the maps for the 24 election. What you see now is nowhere near what is going to be in the 2024 election. They're going to redraw those maps. And if they don't come up with something like 11-3, it'll surprise the heck out of me. I think they feel now that they have nothing to lose. They have no shame. They're not worried about coming up with even a 12-2 type of delegation and putting it forward and saying, hey, how you like that? If you don't like it, it's tough. One thing I want to add in here, Ed, when you talk about how did it get this way, the Supreme Court seats are voted on by statewide election in North Carolina. It's not a district type of voting. So that meant that gerrymandering didn't play a role in the election of our Supreme Court justices. So now you got to turn the focus on the people of the state of North Carolina. What were these people thinking when they made a conscious decision and they went to the poll that I want to put some people in office who's going to redraw these maps and put Republicans in unearned seats and keep Democrats out of office? That's what they were saying to me, my neighbors, my friends. They're saying to me that this is the type of government I want in North Carolina. So, let's be careful and put the blame where it is. You got people out there, Ed, I'm going to call it like it is, white conservative people who are MAGA people who believe in Donald Trump, who think that white supremacy is not a bad thing. These people are the one who's going to the polls and giving the legislature the authority and giving the Supreme Court the numbers to do what they're doing.
Well, that's some bullshit. But you're right. It's our neighbors, it's our coworkers, and those people who enable this and make this happen. The other piece of this, Val, is you can make a case that folks were more concerned probably about the NFL draft than whether or not the Carolina Panthers. I bet you I could go find as many people who could tell me who the Carolina Panthers drafted. They could tell me what happened in the Supreme Court yesterday in North Carolina. And it's one of the more monumental days in the history of the state of North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And the other piece to it, Val, and we talked about it a little bit, is the third case, which was around voting ID. And a lot of people in those groups like the John Locke Foundation and all the Republican think tanks or whatever, they say, well, ID doesn't matter. But this as well as I do, is that in the state of North Carolina and Texas and a lot of places, what they also did was they closed a lot of DMV offices. And especially in North Carolina, it's almost impossible to get into a DMV office to get any kind of ID, including your just regular driver's license if you want to drive. And so, like you said, disabled people, older people who don't drive anymore or never drove, what do they need a picture ID for? At least the kind of picture ID that they're talking about. And I've heard a lot of the Republicans say, that's not a big deal because we'll take just about any ID. But Val, what's the truth about the voter ID requirements in North Carolina and of course around the country? They say it's easy to get an ID, but it's not, is it?
It's not that easy to get an ID, and they want to talk about what IDs are accepted. The case that really threw me for a loop, Ed, was I think it was the 5th or 6th congressional district in North Carolina, up around Greensboro, where North Carolina A&T State University was the subject matter, and they didn't want to take student IDs, which is issued. The North Carolina State A&T State University is a part of the UNC system. It is funded by the taxpayers of the state of North Carolina. And you don't want to accept the student ID from that particular school, but you will accept identifications at the same time from people from the John Locke Foundation, from the Heritage Foundation, from so many other places, maybe even John Birch Society. It's unbelievable the rules that they make with no shame.
And hunting and fishing licenses. I heard somebody from John Locke Foundation yesterday. He's like, "Oh, you can use your hunting or fishing license." I was like, "Come on, bro. You're too cynical." Before we run out of time in this segment, I want to remind you, you're watching The Deal. I'm Ed Clark. That's Cal Atkinson. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed on one of the many platforms, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your fine podcasts. And this is a fine podcast, isn't it, Val? So we encourage people to subscribe and pay attention to it. Val, the last piece before we go to break is the U.S. Supreme Court. They got a lot of ethics issues, and we talked about Clarence Thomas already. The one thing that I know that they're probably going to have to hear in the near term is probably cases related to 1-6. And Donald Trump and those kind of things. Have we seen enough evidence that they won't just fall in line like these state Supreme Courts have and support MAGA? Is there enough room in the U.S. Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas and Alito notwithstanding, right? We can just throw them out because they're always going to vote that way. But is there any hope that on the U.S. Supreme Court that we can get some decent results that go towards preserving democracy?
I hate to be negative on this one, Ed, because it's so important, but I don't see it coming from that side of the house. Anything positive or corrective coming to the public about the Supreme Court is going to have to come from the Democratic leadership. And right now, I don't see any part of the Democratic leadership having the resolve to do anything. It's just like too many other things, Ed. There are too many people in Democratic leadership positions who want to have a preponderance of the evidence and then have the other guy to admit their own wrongdoing, to unlock the jail cell, go in, lock himself in, and throw the keys back up under the door. That's how they plan on doing this. It's called resignations. They want to talk about how bad things are and what Alito did or Thomas did or what Roberts is doing or Gorsuch or whatever, and have one of these guys say, "Yeah, you're right. I am going to resign next week." That's their plan. But in terms of them doing anything to get these guys out of there, to put more people on the court, to minimize their effectiveness in those kinds of things, they're not going to do anything. So that's why I have the position that it's not a lot that's going to be done as long as Democrats in power don't have the gumption to go to the wall. We used to call it balls to the walls and make something happen, guys. These guys are not going to do the Richard Nixon thing. That was the last of that when he resigned. He didn't get kicked out of office. He resigned.
Yeah.
And we think that's the model, and it ain't going to happen no more. Republicans have learned their lesson, regardless of what kind of information you have or evidence you think you might have. Their position is make them come get you. Don't turn yourself in. And then you find out that Democrats don't have the guts to go get them.
Well, I guess I won't be holding my breath.
Nope.
You know what? This is the time to take a break. In the break, you're going to see a clip from an interview with Harry Belafonte from CBC from 1967, and we'll pick up on talking about the passing of Harry Belafonte and a whole bunch of other stuff, and the crazy North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson and a whole bunch more. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
This episode is sponsored by
My Local CFO, helping you build stronger growth by connecting your financial picture to your operational goals. Follow them on Facebook and LinkedIn at My Local CFO, or visit their website at www.mylocalcfo.com.
Color. But I do feel very strongly about the fact that great men have been disenfranchised for a long time and have not been able to sit in high places politically or on other levels because of color. But this has had great psychological ramifications, not only for the Negro community, who has had many reversals over the last couple of years, because the racism which permeates American life from top to bottom in very subtle ways and in very aggressive, obvious ways, the Negro has paid a terrible price for this. But somehow you'll find that racism in its subtlest and its most evil sense has worked its way deep into the fiber of the hearts and minds of many men and women. And with this going on, it has had its incredible influence on my own life. I was born in the ghetto. My mother was a domestic worker. My father was a seaman. I grew up in Harlem. I grew up not only with racism and segregation in America, but I grew up in the West Indies under colonialism. And my aunts and uncles and my grandparents were agriculturalists. They were farmers. And I saw what they did from morning until night and what their rewards were under the might of British exploitation. Yet I've come into my own manhood, and I have sought to apply myself to this world. I have children. I have high hopes for them. I fought in the Second World War. I was in the United States Navy. I was told then, and I fought with the knowledge that this was the war to end all wars, that we were going to defeat fascism and mankind could turn its attention to the best that was in man. And now I come, and my son is 10 years old, and I will arm him with everything that I can so that he will be free of any primitive, medieval, concepts about false patriotism, about boundaries, about the meaning of flags. Mankind is much bigger than all of these primitive symbols. And I don't want to see my boy with his face stuck in some rice paddy off in Vietnam or off in some other land, protecting the interests of the establishment and trying to reward their greed with his life. I'm opposed to it. And I don't want him to be armed with a sense of being able to go off and destroy another human being anywhere in the world whom he's never known. It's inhuman. It's terrible. And the reason I hang around is to make sure that in my old age, if I live to see it, that I will be able to say that in my lifetime I did all that I could with what was at my disposal, because I would hate for my children to look at me and to say, where were you during the moment of the great decision?
And welcome back to our second segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, April 29th, 2023. We're happy you decided to spend some time with us. We started out talking about the North Carolina Supreme Court, Val, because I think that is one of the more monumental events in the history, not only of North Carolina, but the United States of America. And people don't know how impactful this is. North Carolina is the 9th most populous state, moving towards being the 8th most populous state. There's a lot of focus on companies coming in North Carolina. And if North Carolina starts becoming more like Florida and Texas in terms of rights and stuff, I'm not sure those companies are going to continue to come here, Val. So it's important from that standpoint as well. And also just me. When I get up in the morning, I don't want to have to face all this nonsense that the Republicans are doing, but that's besides the point, because we're going to move on. The next piece I want to talk about is the passing of Harry Belafonte. And in the intro coming back in, you saw a clip from 1967. He was on the CBC, Canadian Broadcast Company, Val, and he was talking about his hope for his 10-year-old son, hoping that he would come up in a world where things were fair. But by 1967, he was already feeling not so optimistic, because he was saying there were reversals from 1964 and what happened then. So you're the historian, Val. Talk to me about 1964 and the importance, and why by 1967, Harry Belafonte was already saying, hey, man, I'm not sure, this is going in the right direction.
Well, we go back to 1964. We were right in the middle of getting the 24th Amendment passed, or having it ratified, rather. And it just got ratified on the 23rd of January of 1964. And that stopped states from requiring people to having paid all of their local taxes or pay any kind of special tax or whatever that was related to, associated with voting. And that's the way they used to do it in the Deep South. That says, hey, you got outstanding property taxes, or we can't find record of you haven't paid X, Y, and Z. Right here in the great old state of North Carolina, I can remember when I moved back here from Maryland, back in the early 80s, I couldn't understand why it was so important to list everybody who didn't pay their property taxes on time. And there used to always be a lot of prominent African Americans who maybe didn't pay it on Tuesday when it was due and paid it on Wednesday or whatever, because it was related to the overall taxes or whatever. And it was a big deal. And then I got to understand that they used to use this before the 24th Amendment. They used to use this to say you can't vote. And it was a source of embarrassment and all of those kinds of things. So they just stopped doing that so prominently recently. So it was a big deal in 64. You have to understand this is the year that the Civil Rights Act came out as well, about housing and having access to restaurants and just making everything fair. It was in the process of getting the the 1965 Voting Rights Act passed. That was the key. That's where we were during those years. And we knew that saved us because of the pre-clearance issue surrounding the 1965 Voting Rights Act, that states, portions of states, whatever, had to get their plans pre-cleared before they could implement them. This gave the Justice Department, the NAACP, whomever, time to say, hey, Judge, you take your case to the courts and say, Judge, we're begging the courts to implement a stay on this piece that these folks are about to do, so until we can see if it's constitutional. And then the stay was implemented, and so they couldn't do that. They couldn't gerrymander, or they couldn't talk about moving polls around or closing precincts down and that sort of thing. They couldn't do it. That was critically important. Voting turnout went up through the roof in the African-American community, in the Latino community. More women went out to vote. More elderly showed up to vote. It just went out of the roof. And Democrats started getting people elected to office. This became a sore point with Republicans and the GOP. So they decided, what can we do? We can't, out-message these people. We can't say anything to make them change their mind. So let's keep them from voting. And that's when you start seeing all of the gerrymandering and the voter ID stuff and felonious voting restrictions and all of these kinds of things in an attempt to keep the voter turnout down by people who don't necessarily agree with the message of the grand old party.
Yeah, that's a lot there, Val, and you're right. I mean, it didn't take very long for them to figure out a way around the voting, the amendment that took away poll taxes and all that kind of stuff. The other thing I was thinking about when I was listening to Harry Belafonte is, how in tune he was to the movement, and I'm trying to think now of, are there any people in entertainment, in sports, or whatever that sort of fit that mold of Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and, those people who were Bill Russell and that kind of thing? There's some folks. I mean, Colin Kaepernick made a stand and so on and so forth. But when you see the passing of somebody like Harry Belafonte, number one, they're almost irreplaceable, right? But beyond that, out of this generation of folks, do you see people stepping in that gap, being the same, willing to put their career at risk? There are a few, but they're fewer and far between, aren't they?
They're fewer and far between, Ed. And the reason is they're hiding behind making money. And the big rap stars, the hip hop moguls, and all of these people, you don't see them marching with Al Sharpton, which would have been the equivalent of Harry Belafonte marching with Dr. King. You don't see that because their excuse is that, well, white people buy rap music too, and I don't want to alienate any of my potential customers and that sort of thing. So I'm not political, I'm an entertainer, and you keep hiding behind this stuff, but you don't see them there. But if you look at an NBA bench, when the game's over, who's the first guy in line to give a dap and a hug to the NBA players walking off the floor is some hip hop mogul. And, there's so many of them, I don't know the names of them or who they are, but I can tell by the way they dress and carry themselves and that kind of thing that he must be some kind of hip hop mogul, or he wouldn't be sitting right there on the bench for this particular team and being the first guy he hugged. But you don't see him out there the next day walking with the various civil rights organizational leaders and that kind of thing. They don't do that, to answer your question directly.
Yeah.
You don't have these kind of people to replace a Harry Belafonte. They don't do it. And no disparaging marks against one of your heroes, Michael Jordan. I love him too. But I think that's where it got started, when they were asking him to get involved in some of the rights for African Americans. And he said white folks buy tennis shoes too, and that sort of things. And he refused to do that. And some of us didn't like it at the time. I think we've sort of given him a pass now because we found out that he's doing a lot of things behind the scenes, and he's given tons of money to various organizations and things of that nature. But they don't give of themselves. I go back to the photograph, the iconic photograph of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, Muhammad Ali. It was about 8 or 9 critically prominent athletes over several different athletic programs: boxing, football, basketball, baseball. And they were all there together, putting their things on the line for upward movement, upward mobility of African Americans in politics and in society. And you don't see that today. You can't find that today because the replacement of those guys is by some people who, the basketball players, the football players, they don't want to be politicians. They want to be hip hop stars.
Yeah.
And so we're losing a lot in that. We're losing much.
Well, Val, it brings to mind another passing that happened, and for people in North Carolina will know this, but this is, again, historic from a national perspective. Nathan Garrett, who someone you knew very well and someone I knew a little bit, attended events with or whatever. Talk to me about Nathan Garrett. He was the first Black CPA. Now, keep that in mind. Think about that. Even though he was 91 years old, we're talking about he was the first Black CPA in North Carolina. That means they're probably still on a whole bunch, Val. So talk to me about Nathan Garrett real quick before we run out of time in this segment.
Yeah, Nathan Garrett was, I had some personal dealings with him. I belonged to an organization that he was a part of. We got together weekly and played cards, not gambled, but played cards and that kind of thing. I was glad he took me into that organization. He was also chair of the Duke Medical Center Patient Advocacy council, and he took me into that as well. I thought that that was very important, especially during the time I was still resume building. And we got a lot done. And from that, I switched over and went to the UNC Patient Advocacy Council as well. So I didn't want to leave anybody out. But Nathan started all of that as far as I was concerned. Nathan Garrett did a lot of other personal things, which I don't think it's appropriate for me to mention at this particular time, that he did for me and with me on a personal level. But he was a pioneer in the African American community, not even to talk about his time as chairman of the board for the world's largest Black business, North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. He was chairman of the board. He was a regular board member first. I served as a brief period of time with CEO of that organization. And he was just there when you got ready to do something in the community. If you wanted to find out, have you touched all the bases or get appropriate opinion, Nathan and his wife Wanda were always somebody at the top of the list. Let's check with Nathan and see what he thinks about this, or if he has any advice to give in this area. So he was a big community player. And as you mentioned earlier, the first CPA, Black CPA in North Carolina. He was also the first Black CPA in Detroit. That's where he got a lot of his training in Detroit, Michigan. Spent a lot of time there. So he's a worldly guy. He started a firm in South Africa for a while, and finally got out of the business. He sold his business and moved from one Durham spot to another, but he's always been a Durhamite, and he's going to be missed. As far as I understand, that the final arrangements haven't been made as of yet.
Yeah, that's a big loss, Val. Like I said, the interactions I had with him, I learned a lot. I just sat and listened every opportunity I had to listen to him. Val, let's talk about two other Black folks who are still alive that won't be leaving a legacy as far as I'm concerned. Here's a clip of your boy, Mark Robinson, and we need to talk about this. And then we also want to talk about his buddy, Tim Scott. Here's Mark Robinson.
There are some people that were talking about reparations in this country. They wanted reparations. And I remember I made this particular liberal so angry at me because I told them right to their face, nobody owes you anything for slavery. If you want to tell the truth about it, it is you who owes. It's you who owes. Why do you owe? Because somebody in those fields took stripes for you.
In front of his family and supporters, in the rain, North Carolina's Lieutenant Governor made a big announcement Saturday at A Speedway in Alamance County.
So, today, we make it official. I am running for governor of North Carolina.
Mark Robinson, a Republican, has served as lieutenant governor since 2020. During Saturday's rally, he talked about developing the state's workforce and investing in educational programs for technical training.
Professional welders, mechanics, plumbers, electricians, and so many more are aging out of the workforce, leaving a void that has to be filled. We must present these opportunities to our students.
Robinson also addressing a hot-button issue in North Carolina and across the country: abortion.
We need common sense legislation to prevent abortions after a heartbeat is detected.
Val, Mark Robinson is the lieutenant governor of the state of North Carolina, which I still can't believe when I wake up in the morning. But he says that Negroes owe white people for bringing us here and giving us all this bounty that we have. Val, if you didn't tell me that this wasn't a real live human being, I would think I was watching an episode of the Boondocks, where Uncle Ruckus said the same thing, that Black folks need to be happy that they were brought here out of the jungles of Africa. Talk to me real quick about Mark Robinson. I don't want to talk too much, but we have to say something.
This guy's just ridiculous. I mean, he is going to have his comeuppance. He's going to be given a big mirror to look at some point to say, hey, this is who you really are. He and Tim Scott, you mentioned that coming in, are going to be told and shown, I think, this election cycle, the 2024 election cycle, they are going to find out who they really are and what they really mean to the GOP. They are going to find out that they've been used. Now, what their reaction is going to be, I don't know. But I think this is the election cycle that Robinson and Tim Scott and others like him, Donald and other people, are going to find out that, hey, these guys are using you, man. And it ain't to get other Black people into the GOP. That's the rouge. That's the thing that people just throw out there, the red herring, okay? What they're using you, Mr. Black Guy, is to show white moderates that they are not racist. They're trying to show white moderates that it's okay for you to be a part of the Republican Party because we're not racist as the Democrats are trying to paint us. See, we got this Black guy and he's a U.S. Senator. We got this Black guy and he's a lieutenant governor, okay? But in fact, they control Scott, they control Robinson, and they control anybody else they want to try. The best guy to ask about this, have a sit-down dinner with a gentleman by the name of Michael Steele. He's a Baltimorean. He lives in Baltimore, and he used to be lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, and he is an MSNBC analyst and contributor right now. Talk to him about the GOP and how they deal with Black people and how they use Black people to get what they want.
Yeah, well, Tim Scott, go sit your behind down. I know you got your little exploratory committee. I'm gonna play this in the break, Val, but just a clip from his ad for his announcing his exploratory committee. He did it at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. And I want you folks to realize what the irony of that is. That's where the Civil War started. Mm-hmm. And he does his announcement at Fort Sumter. I was just blown away by the audacity to do that, but I digress. Hey, we need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, Walt Disney. If we get a chance, I want to mention somebody else who passed this week, who started some really trashy TV that we're still paying the price for. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
Attention all food lovers. Tired of the same old meals every day? Want to spice things up in the kitchen? Look no further than King's Pepper. Our website, kingspepper.com, offers a wide range of high-quality spices, seasonings, and blends to take your cooking to the next level. From exotic spices to classic herbs, we have it all. Plus, all of our products are 100% natural and ethically sourced from around the world. Visit kingspepper.com today and discover the flavors that will make your taste buds dance. That's kingspepper.com, where every meal is a flavor adventure.
Former Vice President Mike Pence has testified before a federal grand jury investigating January 6th and his former boss's alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Sources tell CBS News he testified for more than 7 hours yesterday. Former President Trump pushed to stop the former vice president from testifying about their interactions in the days leading up to the Capitol riot. A federal appeals court denied that request Wednesday.
And welcome back to our third and final segment of The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. Thank you so much for spending time with us. We start out talking about the Supreme Court in North Carolina and all their shenanigans, and then the U.S. Supreme Court, Harry Belafonte, Nathan Garrett, and we ended up with Mark Robinson and Tim Scott. Tim Scott just makes me laugh I don't know. It's something about him that I just don't think he's thinking this through, and it has to do with evangelicalism to some extent, Val. And like I said, I got some folks lined up that we're going to bring in to the show a little bit later in the year to talk about the impact of white evangelicalism and this American exceptionalism. I call it the American religion, Val. We have a religion. I mean, we're not full Mormons, but it basically says that anything that white people do in the name of creating the American experience, or whatever you want to call it, is ordained by God. And I think it's a very dangerous way to proceed. You can't run a country with it, and they're going to try. The other thing you saw in the break, and this was coming back in, Val, is a clip about Mike Pence, who was a vice president for Donald Trump. And he was on 1-6 trying to get all the votes together, like you're supposed to do, ceremonial position of the vice president, to say that, Joe Biden was the president, and so on and so forth. And then these folks decided, with the urging of people like Donald Trump, to come in and try to attack Congress and stop the ratification of Joe Biden's ascendancy to the presidency. I'm not surprised, Val, that Mike Pence tried to get out of this. He kept trying to exert some executive privilege, and then he started talking about, well, he was serving in the capacity in the Senate, so he was covered under, the Constitution there, where he didn't have to testify before the grand jury. But the judge said, no, you got to come and testify. And he spent 7 hours, Val, with the grand jury. Talk to me about what happens in a grand jury room, and what might Mike Pence say in there that he would never say out in public. What is your speculation about Mike Pence and how he will be a part of this? I think in the end, the indictment of Donald Trump for 1-6.
Well, talking about what goes on in a grand jury, first of all, as you know, I did serve on a grand jury at one time. First of all, there are 23 jurors, and it's not like your typical criminal jury where you have to have a unanimous verdict and all 12 jurors have to be thinking alike. You got 23 jurors and you need 12 to get a true bill, they call it, or an indictment or whatever it is that the DA wants. So that makes the first difference. The next difference is the one that I like, is that jurors get to ask questions of the person who's being deposed there. You get up and you give your juror number, not your name, because it's a secret thing. You give your juror number and you ask that particular person on the stand who's under oath any kind of question you want. And we can have them there as long as we want. So that's very good for the jurors to help them make up their mind. But again, you only need 12 out of 23 to do whatever you want. So that's where the notion comes in that a DA can indict a ham sandwich if he wants to, because it's pretty easy to do so. And the DA has full control of the voir dire. That is the selection of your particular jurors. He determines basically who he wants. He may start off with 150 people, and he narrows it down to maybe 35 or 40, the 23 that are going to be jurors, and maybe a dozen or so alternates. But that's what happens on the grand jury. But to be there for 7 hours is a long time, and everything he says is under oath. I can't imagine him trying to plead the fifth for 7 hours and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of information that was gleaned in that time frame. And it won't leak out because they are secretive. You don't even know who was on the grand jury. And so I'll be interested to know what they got out that they want to insert in an indictment of Donald Trump, and then have Donald Trump argue against his vice president. This was a big, serious blow for Trump and his defenses and the way he likes to do them. Belining the judge, the DA, the whomever, and that kind of thing, stretching things out until the other people lose interest or lose money or whatever. He's not going to use those tactics in this particular case. So it's going to be interesting to see how things work out going forward.
Yeah, here's the other piece to it, Val. I want you to see this clip. This is Ted Cruz. This is some audio recording in apparently in all this, stuff with CNN and all these other cases, when they were looking for evidence in those civil cases, some audio has emerged of Ted Cruz basically plotting how they were going to do things on 1/6. And I think this is also going to end up impacting the case.
We're looking at this January 6th certification. All of the options that were being discussed were problematic. The mechanism to try to force that is denying certification on the 6th.
Who's deciding who gets inaugurated?
It would be the results of that commission.
I'm joined by Michael Steele. Your reaction?
Dude, masterclass. Look, this absent paper trail and kernels here and there is confusing. It is difficult because there's so many pieces that we don't have, right? You filled in a lot of that information, and the fact that you got the reaction from the senator's office and the senator himself tells me that you struck a nerve. And the reality right now, and this goes to what you said in the beginning of this of your conversation with the audience, is Jack Smith and the entire January 6th team now are looking at this. And this is another piece that's going to fit in very nicely. It's not just what, the players that we.
So basically, Val, Ted Cruz says, well, we could just throw a monkey wrench in it. Leave it to us. We'll cause a stir over on the Senate side. We won't let this thing go through. We have all these backdoor plans that we can work this out. I don't want to talk too much about this, but I do have a question. Donald Trump called your wife ugly. Said your daddy killed John F. Kennedy. What in the world possibly could Donald Trump have on Ted Cruz to make him do this? Was Ted Cruz thinking that Donald Trump might nominate him for the Supreme Court? Does he have pictures of Ted Cruz with a donkey in Tijuana? Because I think that's what he has on Lindsey Graham, but that's a whole nother matter. What the hell is it with Ted Cruz and Donald Trump?
They have been convinced, and when I said they, I'm talking about Ted Cruz and his ilk, all people who think like him. They've been convinced that without MAGA, without that group, no Republican can get out of a primary safely. They can't win a primary election anywhere in the country for any office without MAGA support. Now, once you allow yourself to be convinced of that, you are in another universe. You're in the twilight zone out there. You will allow somebody to call your wife ugly or accuse your dad of being involved in the JFK murder or assassination. You'll do that because you've decided that I want to be a politician. I'm going to be a lifelong member of the Grand Old Party. And without MAGA, I can't win any primaries. So he's got me. He can do anything he wants. He can defecate on my kitchen table. I still got to support him. So
well,
that's Cruz's problem.
That's not a visual I wanted to have, but I get your point, Val. All right, so let's wind this thing up. Here's one other story I want you to see. This is your boy. This is related. This is DeSantis in Florida and his nonsense with Disney.
Governor DeSantis' dispute with Disney just escalated yet again, and now they're going to court.
Yeah, Florida's largest employer just sued the governor and the board he picked to take over Disney's special district. Disney claims it's facing illegal retaliation, and our political editor, Craig Patrick, has the lawsuit and insight on how this fight will play out. Craig.
Well, it's a 77-page suit, and it contains some new details from Disney's perspective on how the fight with Governor DeSantis started. And in it, Disney contends that its former CEO called Governor DeSantis to share concerns over plans to restrict discussions of sexual orientation in school, and Disney claims that DeSantis responded in that conversation by saying, quote, "You should not get involved. It's not going to go well for you." That takes us to the next step. Then when Disney did criticize the governor's restrictions and called it, quote, "the Don't Say Gay bill," and said it would work to repeal it, we then know what the governor said on national TV, said that crossed the line. And Disney claims at that point DeSantis then orchestrated efforts to punish Disney, first by dissolving the special district that gave Disney a great deal of local control over the years, and then by putting the district under the control of the governor's hand-picked board, which has since called for...
So, Val, I think Disney has outsmarted Ron DeSantis, because I don't think that's very hard to do. Now they're suing DeSantis in the state of Florida over all the restrictions they're trying to put on the district that they had created to support Disney. But it also supports a whole bunch of other businesses around it. Here's the thing, Val. Ron DeSantis is so stupid, and he thinks that he can get these MAGA folks by just saying woke, 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 woke over and over. But now he's hurting small businesses that are around Disney. The small business people come to DeSantis and say, "Hey, wait a minute, dude. If my taxes go up, I'm a mom and pop, and I depend on tourists who come and eat here while they're in town. If they don't come to town, my business closes." Disney is the biggest employer in Florida. If they start laying off people, or if they move Disney, which they could do, Nikki Haley invited them to come to South Carolina. If they move Disney, which is a possibility because it's a business, and if they make it too odious to run their business, guess what? They'll move it. Why is Ron DeSantis that stupid? He doesn't even have the full MAGA support. He's getting criticized by Donald Trump. What is his play here? Does he really think that he's going to be the nominee for the Republicans?
Ron DeSantis has gotten on one of his rides in Disney, and he don't know how to get off. Really, he's on one of those rides that says, "This is the playbook. I know what I gotta say. I know it doesn't make sense based on the training and logic that I've gone through and all of my stellar Ivy League schools that I've attended and that sort of thing. But I got to ride this thing out. There's no exit for me. I don't see a way out. I've got to do this." And he's not going to be able to overcome this once everything is over. He's not going to be able to say, "Hey, I apologize. I knew I was wrong. Please accept my apology, but I had no other way out. I am more sane than my past indicates that I am." He's not going to be able to do that. This will be with him until his dying day.
Yeah, I think he's going to go the path of people like Bobby Jindal, right? Everybody said he was the Louisiana governor. Everybody said he was going to be the next coming. And he when's the last time you heard Bobby Jindal's name anywhere? You haven't. And Marco Rubio is never going to be president because he ruined his thing, right, by getting on the Trump train.
Same thing with DeSantis. Same thing.
Same thing. Yeah, here's the last thing, Val. I won't show a clip or anything, but I did want to mention something. Jerry Springer passed away this week. And Jerry Springer, his trashy TV during the day, whatever. He had been the mayor of Cincinnati, and by all accounts, people liked him there. But he created this TV thing, Val, that was completely different than a lot of other things we've ever seen. It stayed on a long time, and it always put, I thought, black folks in a bad light. It was very clownish and people fighting and all that. And what's the legacy of this trash TV? Is this one of the reasons why people don't know about what happened in the North Carolina Supreme Court? Is because we're so focused on all kind of other nonsense.
Well, it's the ultimate gaslighting, Ed. And I talk about this in the second edition of my book, Distractions, where organizations like CNN, MSNBC, who you think should be above this, they are still slaves to something called the Nielsen rating. They are the ratings that determine how much you can charge people for advertisements. Arbitron is the rating that is used on radio. Nielsen rating is used for TV. Nielsen and Arbitron, they run the roost. And all of these people, regardless of who they say they are Jerry Springer in their own way. They do whatever Nielsen and Arbitron will give them highest ratings for. And Jerry Springer started that. He was just unabashed. He didn't care that you knew that that's what he was doing, okay? These other guys, they're out there trying to play games with you, trying to pretend that they're giving you the real news, the real skinny, and this kind, and they're doing nothing but trying to gain ratings. MSNBC, CNN right now, they are running unpaid ads for the GOP on Biden's age. I defy you to tune into one of those stations for more than 5 minutes before something about Biden's age comes up. And what's the GOP paying for that? Nothing. Well, why is NBC, MSNBC, and CNN doing it? Ratings. They do it every time. During the elections coming up, when one candidate gets too far out ahead of the other candidate, the news media goes in and try to pull the top candidate down or push the lower guy up because they want a contentious presidential race, so it creates drama. It creates excitement, which ratings go up and they make more money. They're doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And somebody, and it's going to be in my book, somebody needs to say, hey, we know what you're doing. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're the one out there talking about the Jerry Springers of the world, and you're doing the same thing, just in a different way.
Yeah. Well, we talk about it here, and I guess, one of the advantages of having our own website and our own presence, we can say whatever the hell we want. And right. And you're right, Val. I'm telling you, we're not gonna talk, down Joe Biden, because Donald Trump is only 3 years younger, 2.5 years younger than Biden, and he clearly is not as cognizant, and he has some real issues that people ignore all the time. But we're not going to give him any free pass. And you talk about how they talk about Joe Biden's age. I keep hearing this nonsense about Kamala Harris not being an effective vice president. How many damn vice presidents Was Mike Pence effective? Was Dan Quayle effective? Was George Bush effective when he was vice president for Reagan? Vice presidents do what vice presidents do. Is whatever the hell the president says and be ready in case something happens. And anyway, I won't even get into that. Because I'm looking at the clock, and I know we're going to run out of time. So, Val, as we always do, anything you want to tell us before we leave today?
Well, I told you about the second edition of my second book, entitled Distractions, Distortions, Deceptions, and Outright Lies. And as we talked earlier on, I'm putting it on steroids, a little speed dial action here, because the election of 2024 is right around the corner, and we want to get that out. So stay tuned, keep your ear to the ground. You should be hearing something pretty soon. This thing has got to come out, and we're going to hit the ground running. So that's the next thing coming out of this house here is the second edition of my second book due out soon.
Well, we look forward to that, and we'll make sure we let people know when it's ready. As a programming note, if you're catching this on the Saturday, tomorrow on the 30th of April, I'll be on Connections with me, Ed Clark, and Sherelle James, and we'll be talking about an organization called Every Dot Black, and they have a connection to the Dudley empire that did hair care products, but also to the Fuller Brush Company. And we're going to talk some history about Mr. Dudley and the Fuller Brush Company and how it allowed African Americans to start their own business. But now in 2023, what they're doing is they're helping support new entrepreneurs who want to start their businesses, and they have relationships with folks in the Caribbean and in Africa, and of course here in the United States. So catch that 8 a.m. on Connections on Foxy 107, 104 if you can, if you're up. And then we always replay that starting the Monday after on the website, thedealwithedclark.com. Look for a new piece this week. I'm writing a piece about Tim Scott and Mark Robinson. I'm working on it right now, so that'll be out there as well. In the meantime, like I said, the weather's nice here, so I hope it's nice where you are. I hope you can get out and do something, because it's supposed to get bad in terms of storms and stuff like that tomorrow. So in the meantime, come back next Saturday for another edition of The Deal. Thanks so much. Go out and do something good for somebody today. That's all we ever ask you to do. Bye.